I think gives him the ability to say things that he wouldn't have been able to say in career biographies.
Yeah, did you watch his 60 Minutes segment?
I did.
Yeah. So are you in the part of the book that he talks about like the relations and trips that he went to when he went to India, or?
No, not yet. With Modi?
Mm-hmm.
No, not yet.
Yeah, I heard. I was seeing some stuff on Twitter about it. It was kind of interesting. But hey, everyone.
He really wants to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey everyone. We're gonna probably give it a minute or two, let you guys kind of get settled in. But sorry, Vishal, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say he said one of his main reasons was to really kind of pull the curtain back and give people like a view into what it's like being president. So I think that was a really interesting I think Jimmy Carter has some really good biographies as well, but it's completely different.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of years ago. He's still the stuff that they do on election. He has a foundation that is one of the more efficacious, shall we say, like post-presidency things that I've seen, and they do a lot of election monitoring work that is very, very cool.
Yeah, his library in Georgia is also amazing. It has like a really cool view of the skyline and stuff. But great, so we're gonna go ahead and get started, folks. So everyone, welcome to PEAC's 11th panel in our Leadership and Service series. We are extremely excited and honored to have Henry joining us today. Shashri, can you go to the next slide, please? Great, so a little bit about Henry. Henry Elkus is the founder and CEO of Helena. He cares immensely about creating systems that can be leveraged to enact global, scalable, and systematic change. Outside of Helena, Henry serves as social entrepreneur in residence at the Boston Consulting Group and a special advisor to the Berggruen Institute. He was also named to the 2020 Forbes 30 Under 30 list. At 18, Henry became the youngest panelist on the Wall Street Journal's online experts panel on small business. Until 2014, Henry competed internationally as a ski racer. Henry left Yale University after a sophomore year to operate Helena full-time. Thank you for joining us today, Henry. Very excited to go forward this conversation.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Sure. So, you have a lot in your background, and it's all, really interesting. You went from being a ski racer and also dropping out of Yale. Can you kind of talk a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I think I was benefited by being quite bad at a lot of the things that I wanted to do. So I was a very serious ski racer, but I was, not very good compared to everybody else that I was competing with. So I got to compete at a very high level, but I think the process of diving into a sport like that, full on dropping out of high school or traditional high school, I did a really cool program at Stanford for the online, they offer an online high school for those 4 years. Was extremely eye-opening. When you think about the normal tradition, the kind of traditional high school experience that you get, I just didn't have that. And I was traveling the world. I was trying to make it in a sport that I wasn't good enough to end up making it in. But the experiences you have doing that, meeting regular people from around the world, understanding their problems, having those conversations while your peers are normally in high school. And I also ran a startup that didn't work out for a couple of years in the clothing space while I was skiing. So I think the one thing that happened, whether it was luck or intention, before I went to college was quite a lot of tinkering, and I had the privilege to do it as well, quite a lot of tinkering in subjects and sports that I really cared about. And I think probably as a lack of maturity, I didn't really think deeply about what it would mean for the rest of my life. And I kind of just dove into it. And that was probably my biggest blessing, is if I had thought too hard, I would have come up with way too many good reasons why what I was doing was not the most efficient route to go to an Ivy League school, to get the right job, to have the life that, society tells you to have. And I think taking that off beaten path was, I'm very thankful that I was able to experience that. And the lesson I really learned, though, is just when you are young, like really, really young, pre-college young, I feel like an old man now, it really doesn't matter what you take on. As long as you take something on that you are passionate about and you really go to the depths, the end of the earth to make what you want to happen, you end up learning so many important things. It's kind of like working out when you're really out of shape. At the very, very beginning of you working out, the improvements you make are so enormous, even if you don't use the correct form, even if you're not working out as hard as you want. It's when you're a professional, it's when you're like at the top of the world of what you do, to get 1% better that's when it gets really hard. And I think a lot of people start psyching themselves out when they're in their teenage years of, I want to go and do something. Just do it. You might fail, you might succeed, but if you fail, you're going to learn so many valuable things that'll be helpful.
Right. And can you kind of go a little bit into what motivated you to take those risks at a young age? You know, you talked about you started a company in the clothing space, and
Yeah.
you just kind of explored and kind of everywhere. Can you kind of just tell us why?
Absolutely. It's a bit of a depressing story. When I was 14, there was a neighbor of mine who I went to school with. We were on the same bus, and she was unfortunately run over by a car right in front of the bus.
Oh, no.
And it was growing up in LA, in West LA, it is not representative of the whole world. You aren't representing of the whole world's problems. So everything is relative. But to me, that was an enormous kind of coming of age moment in my life to be reminded that life is extremely short and that nothing is taken for granted. And she was a extremely bright, gregarious, very accomplished person. She's kind of the person in your 8th grade class that is the best amongst everybody else. And to see her life be cut short and the impact that had on the community, but also on me, that had a fundamental phase shift for me, where I felt like this is not taken for granted. This life that I'm living, I need to find things that I want to do and just go for them. And the fear of failure, I think, was unfortunately, it took that for me, I think, to be reminded of the necessity of doing things and not really worrying about failure. And I think I can trace quite a lot of moments in my life, unfortunately, back to that age 14 and experiencing that.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. It seems very personal, but it's very interesting to hear. So kind of moving forward to, so you left Yale and you started Helena, and today it's, become this amazing organization. You have Nobel laureates, you have, Fortune 100 CEOs. Can you kind of take us a step back though and tell us, what prompted you to leave Yale to start Helena, and kind of tell us about, what the initial days were like, the goods, the bads, the hards and difficulties.
Sure. So when I was in college, I was thinking very deeply about a kind of specific subject, which is that for the last couple thousand years, but especially the last couple hundred years, society has relied on a set of organizations to basically solve the world's problems, to keep things in equilibrium. And the shorthand for those organizations they're called institutions. They're institutions of government and think tanks and NGOs, corporations. And what I was struck by in college, this is the 2010s and plus, we start seeing into the media and into the national discussion so many instances of these institutions failing to keep up with global problems, that they're too slow. And I became convinced that there was something special about the 21st century, and especially the speed at which the 21st century moves, that doesn't match these institutions that are made to address those problems. But those institutions were created many, many years ago in a world that was much slower and much different. And I basically convinced myself that there needed to be a new type of institutional model to solve problems for the 21st century. I'm not the only one in the world that has come up with this. This is a pretty wide realization. But I could not stop thinking about that. And the reason why I couldn't stop thinking about it is when you're in college, you think about where you want to work. And I would go and analyze kind of, do I work in the government space? Do I work in the intelligence community? Do I work in the diplomatic community? Do I go to the UN? Do I go to the corporate world? And for what I wanted to do, which is very selfishly wanted to be a part of something that left a mark that changed the world for the better in some way, that actually identified a solution to a major problem or set of problems and fixed it. I felt like it would not be an efficient route at present for me to go and work for another organization, especially when the models of those organizations I disagreed with. So that was the kind of just the initial thinking of why I personally was concerned about this topic and convinced myself that I wanted, if possible, to spend the rest of my life addressing it. And then there was a more longer term thing, which is another thing is very special about the 21st century. If you think about what the Manhattan Project was in the 20th century, it was the advent of a technology, I call it the no take backsies rule. You can't really undo the creation of a nuclear weapon. You can't take that back. And when you look down the barrel of the 21st century, we see so many other Manhattan projects that are about to happen. We are being assaulted by them. If you think about the future of artificial intelligence, at the point at which it starts outrunning us, we cannot take it back. The same thing exists with biological engineering. The
Right.
same thing, unfortunately, exists with a lot of the climate crisis, right? It's not going to be, by best estimates, a world ender, but if Florida sinks, that's really bad, and you can't really undo that. So there's this kind of onslaught of individual decisions that society has to make during our lifetime. And I believe it's the most 50 of the most important years as far as decisions that will be made. The next 50 years will be one of the most consequential 50-year periods in human history. And just kind of knowing that all of us on the Zoom call are going to live through those 50 years, thinking, how can I participate in some way in those decisions? And even if I'm 0.0001% pushing them and helping push them in the right direction, how can I do that? And I think partially just due to lack of my own intelligence and lack of foresight, but also, I guess a little bit of overconfidence, of the college student variety. I felt like, why not create my own organization? Why not think about what model for the 21st century? If you were to create an organization whose goal was to identify problems in the world, identify solutions to those problems, and then actually implement them, and you could start completely from scratch, what would such an organization look like? And that idea fascinated me so much. That was really the incubus of it. As far as, just to answer your question directly, I don't know why I was this stupid, but I actually had no doubt that I should drop out of college once the idea came to me. It wasn't that I tried to hedge the bets and try to think creatively about, oh, if it gets to be this level of success, then I'll drop out. I just became so fascinated with the idea just because it was a fascinating idea, not because I wanted to start a business or start an organization around it, that I just told myself, it wasn't really one morning, it was just over and over and over again. I don't want to do this, I want to do that. And I want to focus on that. And if that requires me to focus on it 24/7, I'll do it. And if that requires me to drop out of school, I'll do it. That was my thinking. It wasn't a grand strategy of, if I sequentialize it at this level after sophomore year, I'll leave. That was just my journey. It's probably the wrong way to do it and not efficient, but it was the way that I did it.
Right. And it sounds like you have no regrets, which is amazing. Can you kind of tell us about, it sounds like basically the start of a startup, to where, you have this idea and you're deciding to take action on it for the first time. What were those initial days like? How'd you get a team around it? What was your experience?
Yeah. It's an excellent question. So we had the mother of all chicken and egg problems for a startup to start. So Helena, just because not many people know about Helena, I'm sure, is just as a refresher overall, what we do is we identify solutions to societal problems around the world. And if we find a solution we believe in, we do everything in our power, project by project, to just implement it. And the first project we ever did, we supported the launch of the world's first commercial carbon capture plant. And that company, Climeworks, is now the world's top company in that space, or one of the world's top companies. The second project we did, we helped pass critical legislation to protect the electrical grid from being hacked. That was 2 executive orders by the President of the United States, 2 unanimously passed bills in California. We did a major project that was on the cover of the New York Times last week called American One Room. So we've been able to do these amazing projects. However, in order to do that stuff, you need money, you need the ideas in the first place, you need operation, you need all this stuff. So what we had to do to get the stuff to do the projects that we now do is the idea was, let's recruit a membership of people and let's not charge them anything, and let's somehow convince some of the world's top leaders to join Helena as members. And then let's sit around with them around the world throughout the year and just ask them, hey, if we were to solve this problem, what would you do? And hopefully the resources that would result from that group of people would allow us to do the work. So the problem that we had at the very beginning was, how the hell do we recruit some of the world's top leaders into our organization with 0 proof points? If you sit in front of General McChrystal, who we did back at the very beginning of the organization, and say, Stan, we want to start an organization that's going to solve the world's problems and do these things. We want you to give us your time and your name and your energy, and your, how do you do that? And so that was the problem. And I'll tell you how we solved that problem, because I think I'm probably not good for much advice, but this is the one thing that just by accident, I think is interesting. We needed to figure out how to get a full membership before we could rely on that membership in order to do our first project, which ended up being the commercial carbon capture business, or supporting the commercial carbon capture business. So what we figured out was, just by necessity, is we sat down with the first couple members and we basically said, tell us what you want to do in your life during the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. If you could have the best possible next couple years of your life, what would you do? And then what we asked them, once they told us that information, is what assets do you currently not have, whether they be money or relationships, whatever it is, that you will need to have in order to do the things that you want to do during the next 5 years? And we collected information from every single person along those axes. So now you're sitting here and you have all of this really important information, which nobody asked these people because they're the world's leaders in these fields. You just assume that they can do it, about what they need. And we realized that member X and member Y had an ability to help each other on that goal. As in, member X had an asset that member Y needed to do a thing. In some cases, it was, member X wants to address a critical problem in climate, but they need a double PhD in this type of chemistry to understand it. And we had that guy and we brought them together. So we actually started doing Helena meetings before we did any project, where we would just sit and connect people very operationally in sessions where we would have them talk to one another. We would take all the notes, we'd set up the entire meeting. And we did this over and over and over again. And so much value, a lot of it I can't share because it's private, came out of these meetings, that the members then start calling up other people saying, I'm part of this amazing group. It's no BS. I don't pay them anything. They don't pay me anything. There's no contracts. I just sit around with people who are the best in the world at what they do. And we work on on solutions to solving problems. That was our cycle that we were able to pull off in the dorm room. I was on Zoom, calling Japan at night, in the middle of the wee hours. I'm in my bare feet, in the snow outside on the Yale campus, just connecting people. And that was such amazing training. And that was actually what the initial kind of problem that we had to solve was. And that took up to a year, by the way, to solve. This was an incredibly challenging thing, but as an intellectual exercise, to be able to talk every single day with some of the world's top leaders in a way where you're helping them is a very different side of these people than you usually see, because they're not used to people asking them what they need and then people trying to help them. And of course, I didn't have the money or the personal resources to help them. It was just connections that did it. And that got us, I think, over the hump to the point where we had enough people to then circulate what our first project could be. And then once we solved we did our first project and we got very lucky, it was a success. We were able to parlay that and rinse and repeat. But to get to that first project was the most challenging part.
Right. And Henry, I think that's phenomenally inspirational. You were doing all this when you were a sophomore and earlier, and I'm a junior right now, and I have trouble even convincing my brother to do things sometimes. But I really like the questions that you're asking when you meet these people, which is, what do you want to accomplish over the next 4 to 5 years or even your lifetime? And what do you need to do that? And I think that really transitions really well into our next question here for you, which is, can you tell us a few about the projects that Helena has kind of executed and worked on? You talked about, the process behind kind of getting that started.
Yeah. Just so I can not bore you guys, I'll try to choose just a couple because there's more than I could fit in the allotted time. I'm going to talk about a project called America in One Room. I'll talk about a project called Shield, and then I'll talk about one that we actually haven't announced yet, but we'll announce soon, just to give you kind of a diversity of ideas. So the project we did called America in One Room is the one we're probably most known for as far as press. It landed on the cover of the New York Times when we first did it, and actually was just back on the cover on election day again. It's my favorite, and it was the most life-changing experience for me. So the American promise for government is that you figure out what the will of the people is. You kind of canvass the population of your country, and they tell you what bills to pass and what they believe, and you're supposed to follow that. And that's called having a constituency. And the president has a constituency. It's the United States and Congress people. And of course, we now live in a world in which we kind of cynically understand that we don't actually understand what the will of the people is. And when politicians make decisions, it's often not out of this moral, attempt to understand what the people want. It's about power, and it's about these different things. And issues with polls and all these other problems make that up. And there's this amazing graph that Princeton did where it shows the likelihood that something will actually get passed, and then the percentage of the country that wants it to pass. And they're completely inversely correlated, which is messed up. So we did a amazing, really, really cool project that I'm very proud of, in which we tried to actually ascertain the will of the American people. And the way that we did this we partnered with two amazing Helena members, Jim Fishkin and Larry Diamond of Stanford University, who run the Center for Deliberative Democracy at Stanford, but they're two of the great political science professors of our time. And with them, we actually, out of millions of Americans, did a robust, first of its kind scientific study to find a group of people. We ended up getting 526 people.
Wow.
That group represented the American public as perfectly as possible by demographic. We then went to Texas and rented out one of the largest hotels in Texas, bought it out for 3 straight days, the Gaylord Texan Hotel, flew all of these people to the hotel and forced them to live with one another for 3 straight days. When they arrived at the hotel, we polled all of them, basically, what do you currently believe about all of the critical issues facing the country? And this is in 2019, so right before the election. Then in extremely regimented ways, in these focus groups, we had moderators, we had a 50-page briefing document that was Republican and Democrat sided. We had an amazing bipartisan advisory council, and we had multiple presidential candidates come virtually and actually talk to this group. We had them discuss and debate American politics for 9 straight hours a day for 3 straight days. Complete strangers. Imagine you're there, you're an individual in America, and you're faced with representations of every other person in the country physically in front of you in a hotel. And at the end of the 3 days, we gave them the same poll, and we measured how they changed their views over those 3 days. And we open sourced all the data to the press, and it was just a bonanza. It was amazing. We measured up to a 40% change in opinion on both political parties on these key issues. And we basically showed is, surprise, democracy can work if you do it right. And also surprise, Americans believe very different things than the press tells you that Americans believe. And the press really carried this message, and Obama endorsed it. Bill Clinton talked about it right after it happened. We started getting calls from other countries saying, hey, we want to do this deliberative democracy process as it has been done for 30 straight years before that in many other countries. 2 of them actually did it after. Iceland and Chile were undergoing and still are undergoing constitutional changes. And they used this model of getting Chile in one room and Iceland in one room to help make that decision. So we are now focused on how do we get this bigger and bigger? How do we do this on a more scaled level? But we did this project to actually understand what America thinks, and nobody had done that before at the level that we did it. So that's one project I'm really proud of. Another project is the one on the electrical grid. I wanted to just give that because it's a very different example. We identified, and this is Sam Feinberg, our COO, was amazing, ran this project. We identified a list of things that we felt were existential risks to the US and to the world. Like, if this happens, it would be really bad list. And then we tried to kind of collaterate it with the likelihood that it would happen. And one of them stuck out like a sore thumb, which a lot of people don't know, which is that the US and North American electrical grid is the world's largest single machine. And it's extremely vulnerable. It's like having a house, having a bunch of gold in your, right outside of your front door, and then not locking your front door and just leaving it open. That's essentially what the US electrical grid, unfortunately, is across a lot of different dimensions. It can be fried by the sun. It can be hacked. That's the biggest threat. Physical attack, accidents, all these different things roll together. There's a bipartisan consensus that there's a scary likelihood per decade, up to a 10% chance that part or all of the grid could go down. And for this project, completely separate from American One Room, we actually wrote and helped pass through education to key members of the California State Senate, to the federal government. We did a partnership with the US Air Force and a summit with the intelligence community to actually advocate for changes that ended up happening to bring much more funding and much more emergency protection to the critical parts of the grid. That's a second project. And then I'll just bore you with a third really quickly, because one of the things about Helena that's interesting is we don't have any bias on what type of project we do. So we do projects that are investments, starting new businesses, for-profit work. We have a nonprofit that does projects if they're best done as a nonprofit. And we also think about legislation, like with the electrical grid project. There's a new project we're going to announce. We made a large investment in a company that is yet to be announced, hopefully in 2021, that is an alternative for single-use plastics. So I call it non-BS biodegradable. It's actually biodegradable. So imagine you come home, you Uber Eats takeout, and the takeout comes, it's in a box, and it's in a bag, and inside the bag is a box, and inside the box is a plate, and there's a plastic fork and a plastic spoon. You eat your food, and then instead of throwing it away, you actually put everything I just said, the box, the bag, everything, into your dishwasher. And then you turn your dishwasher on, you open it up after 30 minutes, and there's nothing in the dishwasher. It's completely melted.
Wow.
And even if you didn't put it in your dishwasher, you put it into the recycling bin or the trash bin, ends up in the landfill, the natural humidity and condensation in the atmosphere actually degrades it fully. And it's not a plastic, it's a replacement for plastic. So that's an example of a business solution where we feel like, amazing, we found a market compatible, a market fit to solve a problem that everybody already wants to solve, that is not just biodegradable, but it's also cost competitive. So that's another forthcoming kind of Helena project. We've done, about 10 of these general efforts so far over the last 5 years. And in addition to that, we support on a smaller level, a lot of the members' work. So everything I just said, all these big projects we do with the members, whether it's the funding, it's the other types of capital, it's the leadership, coming up with the idea, doing diligence on it. But the ones that don't make it as we call them capital P major Helena projects, there's a whole multitude of things that we're supporting that are sometimes even more impactful. 50 to 100 of these things at a time in small levels throughout the membership as well.
Hey, I just want to start by saying congratulations on the new project. That sounds really cool. I mean, I can't even imagine putting something in the dishwasher and opening it and being gone. But I don't want to. I have so many questions, but let's kind of leave time for some Q&A. So, kind of moving on to the next question. So this is kind of just wrapping up your story with Helena. Can you kind of tell us what your key takeaways were from leading the organization for this long? And kind of a few of your plans for Helena moving forward. What's on the horizon and what are you looking forward to?
Sure. I think one of the things that entrepreneurs, but just people do, or at least I do it, is at the end of a year, I kind of look back at the last 12 months and I try to be very brutal and try to think about what have I actually done in the last 12 months, or what has my company actually done? And then you try to compare that to the amount of noise you're making or the amount of movement you're making. And sometimes they're not correlated. So I think the key takeaways that I have for Helena after 5 years is actually, unfortunately, if I were to go and do it again, I think we could get everything we got done in a way shorter amount of time. Like, I think we wasted a lot of energy. And I don't know if I didn't have the benefit of hindsight, I probably would have done the same thing. But I think that I'll try to outline areas that we wasted energy, because I want this to be an actual, like a non-BS answer. And I think that the best way for me to do this is to tell you how we've screwed up. And there's 1,000 ways we've screwed up. I think number one, and ironically, because I'm a college dropout, I think we fell in some ways for credentialism in a lot of areas, where we would believe or be biased towards believing in an idea too much because it came from somebody with a background that was impressive. And then we would discount ideas that ended up working or being very valuable from people that didn't have an impressive background. And I'd knock myself in the head too much for that, or probably not enough, actually, just because I should be the one that knows that, given the fact that I don't have the credentials that other people do to start. I think another thing is we realized over time something that is so simple, but people don't really understand, which is fields. Fields don't really exist. This is something that people don't really get. If you say you're a chemist, what you're really saying is, I'm told by society that I should be tagged by the name chemist. But the amount of skills that you need as a chemist far way outside. It's about communication of what you've done. Right. It's about raising the money for your lab. It's about the bureaucracy and the politics. So one of the advantages that Helena brings is, I think we learned it early, but not early enough, that we're not trying to get a quota system of members or a quota system of projects. We're not concerned with saying, oh, we did X amount of projects involving climate. We've decided to do the projects that work and to bring in the people that can help us do the projects, period. And if it makes it look really, really pretty, if it makes it look unpretty, we don't care. It took us way too long, I think, to get over ourselves on that. And there's so many organizations, unfortunately, that are still so tied to saying, I am a climate organization. I'm gonna, for the next 10 years, only work on climate stuff. My question is why? What makes you so confident in that? How do you know 10 years in advance that you'll still be doing something? Why is that the thing you need to do in the world? The answer is you don't. You're being presumptuous. So I think everything boils down to just declaring ignorance from the beginning, and then saying, okay, given that I've declared ignorance, that I don't know anything, how can I use first principle thinking to just pile on more and more facts that I'm observing? And how can I take away assumptions that I brought in before? So that's the takeaways. And I think as far as the next steps for Helena, if you go back to just the beginning of the organization, I'll just list them by things that people said, oh, it's never going to happen, right? So the first, it's never going to happen was you can't get these people to join the membership. And then it was, okay, you got these people in the membership. How are you going to leverage them to talk to one another? Okay, well, you've leveraged them to talk to one another. There's value there. How are you going to convert that to an operational organization that actually does stuff? We did that on the nonprofit side. And then I think the next one was, okay, you've proven that you can do this on the nonprofit side across these domains. But the business world is where a lot of the world's problems exist and where a lot of the solutions exist. Can you show that Helena, in addition to everything else is doing, can operate a serious and effective and efficient financial organization that provides capital and operational expertise to solutions to major problems that happen to be through the capital markets and through business? And I think we are starting to really do that. And I think that we've had a major set of wins this year. But I think the next kind of couple of years for Helena is, how can Helena show overall that we can run a real kind of financial operation on the investing side and on the business operation side that is world-class? And I think if we can do that and show that, which I'm very confident we're on our way to do, it brings us holistically to a much different place as an organization across every domain, including scaling up our own team and our own capital to take on bigger and bigger problems that right now we can't do because they're billion-dollar problems or centimillion-dollar problems that require that level of funding like that and with the right timing. And we're not there yet, but I think we're headed towards there, which is really, really exciting.
Right. And it's really great to hear that, your takeaway is basically the first one being, the meritocracy system is really what works the best, valuing the idea, not really where it comes from. And yeah, I'm really excited to see, how Helena moves forward, Henry. So kind of moving on to our next question here. I listened to your TED Talk, I thought it was phenomenal. I really encourage everyone that has, 15 minutes to kind of make time to listen to it. So kind of just recapping really poorly, you talk about how it's important for us to kind of transition from being reactive to proactive. And in this world where, problems arise quicker than they ever have before, it's really important for us to understand how to band together and solve them together as a society. So can you tell us, as a youth generation having to deal with these issues that are going to come up over the next few decades, how can we prioritize taking proactive action? And how can we ensure that we're able to do it together?
This is the question of our times. We have to solve the following problem to do it. And then I'll diagnose the problem and then I'll try to give my stab at the solution.
Sure.
The problem is that humanity so far has done an incredibly good job when something bad happens where they fix it afterwards. I think that's a controversial thing to say with COVID. I think that's been a botch. But when there is that level of pressure because something has happened, fixing it has been easy. Churchill has this quote, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? What we are really bad at is identifying that something could happen and without taking credit, solving it and then making sure it doesn't happen in the first place. There are these amazing stories of people saving the world from a problem before it occurs. My favorite one, I'm forgetting the guy's name, the Russian sub operator who's in a submarine on the base in the ocean around Cuba. This entire sub has been convinced that a nuclear war is starting, and he's the guy that has to turn the key to launch the nuclear weapon, and he doesn't do it. That's the guy that should win the Nobel Peace Prize, not the person that identifies that something bad has happened and fixes it. So our generation needs to solve that problem, because the speed at which things are moving is now too quickly, where if we wait till something bad, imagine if we wait until the technological singularity occurs and then realize, oh, we should fix it. That's the wrong time to try to solve AI, right? So that's the problem. How do we address that? I think we need to figure out different ways of assigning credit to people. I think who gets credit drives human decision making. And I think right now, when you think about who gets credit, a lot of the credit is given in power, some of it's given in fame, and some of it's given in money. I think we need to invent a different type of credit to reward people for working on these types of solutions rather than just those three. And if we can't do that, we need to find some combination of those three things that is different than ever before to get it done. And I don't know if I have the main solution for that. I think one of the things that Helena tries to really do, especially in talks like this, is to promote as much as possible the types of solutions that, like the SHIELD project, where I'm never going to be able to prove to the media that Helena was in any way responsible for preventing a grid shutdown from happening if that never occurs. But we'd be happy with that. And I think putting together types of content or better types of PR, better types of credit for these organizations that are working on that to attract the top talent from our generation there will be essential for fields like AI and genetic engineering, where actually the most important work right there is happening right now, because the decisions that are being made right now on a compounding basis will affect so many lives in the future. And how can we get people away from working at the top social media companies to make better ads and move them towards there? It means reinventing the type of societal benefit that you get from doing so.
Right, and it's really interesting to hear your perspective on it, Henry. And I definitely do agree that it's the way we incentivize people through reward systems definitely needs to be kind of revised and adapted, given that our world is changing very quickly. And so this kind of takes us to our last question, which is, you talked a little bit about, the example with the chemist. When you're a chemist, you don't only just look at chemistry, you have to realize how to put it in context of other things and problems and solutions. So can you tell us a little bit about what skills you think are, pivotal for students and, younger people to kind of facilitate our growth into future leaders?
I think my answer to this is extremely simple, which is the power of reading. So for me, I admit that until actually I dropped out of college, I did not really read. I don't know if I actually sat down with a book, read it from front to back. And since then, it's become like my main hobby. And I have like an Instagram where every time I finish a book, I post it there to keep me accountable, but so people can see it. I post it on the Helena website. I've become obsessed with it. And the reason why is I can see the benefits for my own leadership and my own business by being able to just look into and kind of coagulate, shall we say, the best ideas that humans have ever come up with and put them into my brain. The fact that you can do that for such a low cost, sometimes free, with online information, that is the secret that everybody knows exists, but nobody actually wants to do. The habits that you end up getting by reading every single day, hours a day, have implications across every other domain of leadership. So without I just actually think the answer to this is find books that are about things that you need to know more information about and read those, fall in love with it, and then read everything else. And if you can create the habit where you are reading as much as you possibly can, good books, and I can recommend anybody some if you like, but there's a lot of wealth of information out there on which books to read. As far as a leadership tool, that alone is more powerful than any kind of pithy idea or statement I've heard. As far as from what has changed my life, as far as I cannot believe how unintelligent I was about a lot of subjects even a year ago. I'm sure a year from now I'll think that about myself right now, but it just shows you, I think, the improvement you can make also in your own happiness and your mental health from sitting down with a physical book, spending hours engaging in an argument. It distracts you from life in the best possible way, and then it adds on to every amount of your decisions throughout your life. And then the final thing I'll say is just as far as leadership. We were talking before this about reading biographies. I'm a huge defender of biographies. I think some of them are really cheesy, but I would really recommend doing it. And what it allows you to do, if you really read a lot, is when you're facing down a specific decision as a leader or running a startup or whatever it is, you start to think about what the people that you've read biographies about would do in your situation based upon their patterns of leadership. And if you read enough, you actually get a lot of people on your shoulder kind of whispering you in your ear, I would do this or I would do this. And you're just given more options and more facts about how to make a given decision than everybody else. It is such an asymmetric advantage to do that. And a lot of people just know that you can read, but don't do it unless it's a socially cool thing to do. But to do it in private for fun, that is the key, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks for that, Henry. And I'm botching this quote. I think it's either from Plato or Aristotle, but he says, books are the easiest way to get what another man has toiled for. And I mean, yeah, it's great to hear you kind of reinforce that. So thank you so much for answering our preset questions. We're going to turn it over to the audience now. So please type your questions into the chat or chat them to me actually personally, or Vishal, and we'll call on you to read your question out loud.
Hey, Henry. So I can actually start off here. This is Vishal. So yeah, we were talking about beforehand about the books and biographies, right? And so, if you could meet any of those people like in real life, right? Like if you could meet Henry Kissinger or Cicero or LBJ, or Obama? I mean, which one of them would it be and why?
Oh, you're going to regret you asked me this. I mean, this is like my question. Let me answer it just from an intellectual standpoint, because there's one person that just to me I find so fascinating, and it's probably a myth, but if I could be there with him at that one moment, just curiously, it would be cool. And then I'll try to give a more practical answer after. Apparently, there was a moment in Alexander the Great's life where he had felt that he had conquered the entire world, that he was in modern day India, that he had basically conquered all the land in the world, and that his astronomer, and I think this is BS, I think it's probably a myth because it's just too cute, but his astronomer walks up to him and kind of tells him that he's discovered that the stuff in the sky, all these bright lights, are actually other worlds. And Alexander the Great goes from this moment where he's having dinner celebrating, that he's conquered the entire world, with the moment that we all have where we realize in our lives that we're not alone, and that the universe is way more than where we are. And I just feel like that's one of the only times in human history that anybody has ever had that thought come across their brain. And to be physically there, that would be who I'd have dinner with, just out of curiosity, if that ever happened. I think as far as a practical person, especially someone who's alive, it's a great question. And, I think, and it's probably just because I'm reading Obama's new biography now, I am quite curious about the expectations that he had in becoming president, and how he felt about them, and what it was like in 2008, replacing George W. Bush during that particular time in American history, and what the challenges were to live up to expectations that were so high. Not to make and bestow any of my political beliefs. I just think that would be, as far as just curious as the kind of stress load that was on him and how he thought through those types of decisions, I feel like is one of the ultimate kind of positions that a living human being has been in during our lifetime. And to experience that just as a kid, I was so fascinated by it. So I would ask him that question.
Well, thank you for answering my question, Henry. I actually think Mariana sent me a question. If you want to come off of mute, Mariana, and ask them.
I have two very different questions, but the first one is, in undergrad, I started a business trying to tackle the single-use plastic biodegradable issue. But what I learned is that the biodegradable products that are common in the marketplace, if they end up in landfills or are not properly disposed of, they actually emit the greenhouse gases. I was wondering if you can say what the products you're developing are made of, and if they're not disposed of properly, do they emit those greenhouse gases?
It's a great question. And just to repeat it for the group, because I think this is one of the core problems with the plastics issue, is multi-million-dollar machines are often needed to actually decompose what a lot of people say are biodegradable. And PLA is it's a multi-billion-dollar industry of products that are BS biodegradable, in my opinion. And there's actually states like California have passed bills banning companies that use these types of products from even saying they're biodegradable, because it's so untrue that they're biodegradable. So you're correct about that point. I unfortunately will email you right away the second we announce it, but I just don't want to get away with a press embargo. This is not the silver bullet to solve all of the climate change solution, but it is something we worked on for over a year, did a lot of diligence on, and felt very confident that it actually is fully biodegradable. I've held it in my own hands. It's doing a lot of revenue right now. It isn't a fit for every single use of plastic, but what it does is you can actually modulate the amount of rigidity. So, for example, if you're going to make this plastic bottle, right, there's a certain shelf life it needs. But if you're going to do takeout where it's going to be consumed within a 24-hour period, you need a different one. So what this company is able to do is actually custom create per use case the amount of time it takes to fully biodegrade. But when it does biodegrade, it actually biodegrades into a fluid that tastes not great, but you could actually drink it and it would have no harmful effects. 99% of humans, I believe, have microplastics in their bloodstream. So it's not just replacing plastics with a different type of plastic that is better biodegradable. It's actually finding something that isn't plastic, that doesn't have microplastics, that doesn't go into your bloodstream, that doesn't go into these are the types of things that we really focused on to do it. So if I can get your email after, I'll actually just ping you the second that I can send you the information on it, because I would love to hear your thoughts and love to share it with you.
Thank you very much. I will send you my email. And my second question, completely different, is have you watched the documentary on Social Dilemma? If you did, I'm assuming you did, which you kind of touched on, what can the top social media companies do to help the societal problem of not identifying the big problem like before it actually happens?
This is an excellent question and allows me to brag a tiny bit. The director of that doc is a Helena member. Tristan Harris, who's the star of it, is a Helena member. And then a couple other people in the doc are also Helena members. And Tristan is actually doing an op-ed that will be out soon. I'll send to you. I can't say where it's going to be placed yet because I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I'll send it to you when it comes out about this exact question in the next couple of weeks. We've been working on that for a while. I thought it was a really good documentary about an important topic. I actually have something that I believe, and I have no place to say this, is, everybody and their mother can diagnose the problem with what social media has done to our society and has done to information ecology, and also people not agreeing with one another. That I think I don't need to preach to the choir more about why that's a problem. So the question is then, what is the actual solution to this problem? Because that's really hard. I heard something, and I'm not allowed to say who said it to me for a reason. I think he should take credit for it, but I'll just kind of pass it on to this because I think it actually is one of the solutions. Think about the industries like the medical industry and the legal industry and the Hippocratic oath. You have to take an oath to be a doctor. This is, thou cannot hurt thy patient. You have to take an oath as a lawyer that unless you're given information by your client, if you're a psychiatrist as well, that somebody will be killed if you don't say this information. You have to keep it secret. You can't harm your client. There should be, so people talk about the feasibility of actually doing regulation on social media. It is consistent with so many multi-thousand-year-old industries that we have oaths. Social media companies should have an oath. We should take the exact same language that has already been passed by generations and generations of governments across the spectrum, democracies, whatever it is. And we should have that oath be respected by social media companies. And they should be penalized if you can empirically prove that you are harming the mental health, as this documentary described very well, you're harming the political health, or you're harming the economic health of your users through your platforms. I'm not smart enough yet, and we haven't focused on this at Helena, but I'm sure there is a way to, in some manner, make progress on concretizing what would make up harming a user. And that should be the regulation. And anybody that says that isn't feasible has to tell me, in my opinion, why it wasn't feasible thousands of years ago for doctors to commit you shouldn't harm your patient. We've already done this for thousands of years. So that to me is what nobody is really talking about when it comes down to social media companies. I think because it's a big, bold idea and it'll involve trillions of dollars and a lot of politics. But thinking idealistically, that is actually the solution, in my opinion. As far as tried and true legislative models to actually regulate these companies, that would be the way I would do it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, while we're waiting for our next one, Henry, I actually have one for you.
Sure.
You talked about America in One Room, and you talked about the successes of the program. Can you tell us about what you were unable to achieve, and can you tell us about the forces for why?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we were unable to achieve with America in One Room that I want to achieve later is I can't point to a bill that was passed or a person that got elected or some quantifiable political systemic change that occurred from America in One Room. It got all this amazing press. Millions of people know about it. It got people talking, but it didn't have, I think, like a bill that I can point to. And in the future, I feel like that needs to be a core focus where there's something operational that occurs out of it. And I think it was fine to do this as a first step, and I think it got a lot of noise, but that'll be the next thing that we do. I think the reason why is a little bit more boring, which is resources and time. We really rushed. It was my focus night and day and my staff. There was an amazing chief of staff, Rebecca Evangelos, who basically ran that project for us right out of USC, and she did an amazing job. I mean, she should get the credit for it. But we've worked for just a year to make that happen because it was such a production. It was a multi-million-dollar event, and we had all these questions that we didn't know the answers to. Like, were people going to try to fight each other? Was there going to be violence? So we were really worried about just what happens when you do this experiment. Now we know what happens. And I think the next step is going to be, how do we link that to an actionable solution that can occur? And it's actually been done in the past. I'll give you one just really quick example. There was a deliberative poll, this model of bringing together a representative sample that was done in the state of Texas to actually decide what types of energy use Texas should use for the next 10 years. This is in the 90s. And when people came into this, they were 80% opposed to wind power for Texas, and they left 80% in favor of wind power after discussing it. And you can trace from this event directly that Texas went from 50 dead last out of the 50 states in the US on wind power to #1 out of the 50 states in the US in wind power. So we want to do more stuff like that, but at a global scale, or at least at a countrywide scale. That would be very cool. And I think that's our goal next time.
Great, thanks. Vishal, do we have some questions in the chat?
Yeah, I think Shashrik has a question.
Hi, Henry. First of all, I just want to thank you for talking today. My question relates more to your American One Room project. So you talked a little bit about how you were able to solve some sort of partisan issue with a bipartisan group. But that was obviously like a small scale of people, about 500, you said. So in the larger scale of things, I think our country's become more and more divided, especially with like the recent election and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, how do you solve the issue of political partisanship, even though it's become more and more polarizing over the past 4 years? What are your solutions towards solving that type of issue?
There is a set, I think, of, so the behind that question, right, is how do you solve partisanship? But why do we want to solve partisanship? The reason we want to solve partisanship is that our country should be a democracy. And if it operates as a democracy, partisanship does exist, but it exists in a healthy way in which people debate and then they decide to come up with a solution and then actually implement it. And that's the old America that we nostalgically wish for, although there were a lot of problems with the old America that we've now addressed. So we want to keep the solutions that we've made, very partially. We want to keep, but we want to regain, I think, a lot of the efficacy of the democratic process. As far as concrete things that I think need to be done on a structural level to address this, and this is not going to be a commentary on the social problems that we have, which are way more entrenched than I'm about to say, but just as far as things that can be done, there's a couple of fundamental democratic processes that I think are not optimal and also not what the founding fathers intended. Let me go through a couple of them just as an example. The Supreme Court is not supposed to be a political body, and it has become a political body. How do we address that? Well, there's 1,000 different options. Maybe we get rid of life terms. Maybe this idea that a president, Democratic or Republican, at the very end of their term, appoints somebody who is in their 40s or their 50s, is going to live with modern science, maybe 50 or more years. For them to have a hold over the American people, especially if they're a partisan appointment, that's not what the founding fathers intended. So how do you address that? Get rid of life terms, maybe elongate the Supreme Court, add seats to the Supreme Court so it isn't as easy to stack it. That's one. Second, electoral college. We're hush hush doing a deliberative poll, American One Room, just in the electoral college right now, actually, and getting the data back. But the electoral college was not founded by the founding fathers. It was not the original idea for the country we live in. There's a bunch of amazing books I could recommend on it, but you could trace a lot of Reconstruction era kind of leading into Jim Crow kind of race-based discrimination on the electoral college. And you can also see that both Republican and Democratic presidents and administrations and parties have at various times all said, we don't like the electoral college, we should get rid of it, or we should at least amend it. So as far as specific things there, you could either abolish it, which I think has its own downsides, but you could take away potentially, and this is not my opinion, this is just throwing it out there, the winner take all model, right? Imagine if you're a Republican in the state of California. How do you feel every time there's an election? You feel like your vote's not going to matter. So why not allocate electoral college votes, not all at once? If you win 50.1% of California, you shouldn't get every single electoral college vote from California. Why don't you allocate it proportionally? There's that. And then you get into other things like ranked choice voting. All of these things, I believe, are the structural problems that create the problem of division in our country, plus many other things. But as far as like, if I was Joe Biden, or if I was the incoming president, or if I had an administration, I could make decisions, I would start with trying to address those systemic, changeable legal avenues. And then with that as a base, I think start to then think more broadly about the sociological problems with our country, wealth, the wealth gap and all of that stuff, which we'd spend hours talking about.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions in the chat?
think we're close to ending too.
Could I ask one follow-up to that? My
Sure.
question I had. So I guess since you talked a lot about how you fix, just issues like within the electoral college and all that, do you think, I feel that sometimes politicians rely, or like the as a kind of basis for their opinion, they use the Constitution, but I feel like sometimes the Constitution seems really just outdated. Do you think there's some sort of I guess update that needs to happen in our political system and in our government to achieve and to solve partisan problems like the ones you mentioned?
So I think the question is basically, if I can repeat it back to you, the Constitution is not a set document that we can rely on to solve every one of our problems. Yet American government in some ways relies on the Constitution as a founding document to decide whether something should work or should not, or is legal or is not. And I think that's an important point to make. And again, I go back to, I think, the fact, which is that democracy is the best of the worst governments, right? It is not the perfect solution to every problem, but we are yet to find a better governmental solution. And one of the things about democracy is that it's founded based upon a central document and a set of checks and balances, and the Constitution being that central document. And when you are to make decisions on it, you have to kind of rely on that. Or if you don't rely on it and you think it's wrong, you have to interpret it. And I think what I was getting to with the last answer is that the way that we interpret and try to break out decisions on whether the Constitution is correct or not, the Supreme Court and these other bodies that we rely on to do this are now becoming politicized. So when you have a partisan microscope that is being put on something that shouldn't be partisan, you start breaking down the original founding document. So I don't actually think the Constitution is necessarily the problem. It's whether we can engage on a nonpartisan basis with what is underlying the Constitution, right? Did the founding fathers think about anti-tank missiles and AT-4s rather than muskets when they were writing the Second Amendment, right? Why is the Third Amendment about quartering troops? Is that more important than the Equal Rights Clause? Why is it in that order? If we're not allowed to actually have these conversations with a basis of nonpartisanship, we can't solve them because it'll just go down party lines and it'll make people more opposed to one another. So I don't have a magic solution. I don't think anybody does. And I think it's a collective process. We all have to believe that there could be a solution for there to be a solution. But I think that a lot of the things that we stand upon, a lot of these institutions, again, are not built to allow us to solve that problem. And that's why when I think the thing I'll just end on is thinking about these structural democratic reforms is something that I would recommend if I had any say in the matter over the next 8 years, or 4 to 8 years, this next administration really thinks deeply about, because they are the problems that create the problems and they're not the surface ones.
Great, so we'll go ahead and cap it off there. I just want to start by saying thank you very much, Henry. The last 60 minutes was inspirational, to say the least. And for everyone that wants to watch this again or wants to share it with a friend, this will be on YouTube and Spotify. And so can everyone just please just type in the chat, thank you to Henry as we send them off.
Thanks, guys.